In this presentation, we'll talk about the IP management core processes. As you are seeing, the slide is very clear. We have all the information, but I will speak a little bit just to do it. So as we have seen yesterday, we have three kinds of processes, the business one, the core processes, and the support processes. In general, we think that we are in IP management, we are in the support processes, but this is not correct, because our processes are directly correlated to the value added, because we have an external customer at the beginning and at the end of the process, and because also we can make a significant contribution to the customer and to our company. So as you see, we have 9 kinds of processes. The first one, we will start all the time by develop the IP strategy in order to protect and monetize the IP portfolio of the company, in order to assure a competitive advantage and maximize supernatural profits. Secondly, once we have the IP strategy, we generate the IP. So we will create all the IP assets like patents, trademarks, copyrights, trade secrets. And then we should create processes to manage the day-to-day operations of all these IP assets. We have processes related to IP risk management, and this will help us to identify and assess risk situation from own and from third parties. Then we have processes related to IP enforcement. Here, the processes will help to identify and handle the IP right infringement. Processes related to defense. Here we have all the process involving defending our company from challenges and from attacks by third parties. The IP transaction is related to all the transfer of ownership or licensing right. So it could be acquisition, licensing, all this kind of transfer will be explained in the IP transactions processes. Concerning the IP reporting processes, here the aim of these processes is to create transparency on our IP investment. So we can show to the management how we are managing our resources and how we are able to optimize our IP portfolio in alignment with the strategy of the company. Finally, the process related to the IP awareness raising. So this involves the education of employees, stakeholders, and all the public concerned by our intellectual property. This could be by trainings or other form of education form. Thank you.
For the generation of IP, we may have following sub-process. The first one is identification of IP-related business model element with an systemic thinking about the electromobility. We may know that the vehicle is just one part of an ecosystem. So I think that a hub monopoly can be applied for the whole ecosystem. In addition, the ecosystem includes other components such as the power supply, transport infrastructure, parking space, and so on. So these components must be connected and interlinked in order to enable the sustainable mobility. Then the value added can be applied for this component. Afterward, the is the processing of invention disclosure. This is all my guess. This could be internal disclosure, because if the external the invention would be lost its novelty. So this would be the internal disclosure to the responsible team or department, such as managing board or R&D team. The inputs are the about model element. Then the inputs will be processed by the disclosure team to have the primary result, so that the invention in a charging station in parking space as an investment object. Afterward, the next sub-process is the detection of customer relevant feature. The result from the previous sub-process will be input to detect the relevant feature from the customer, possibly by conducting a market survey or investigation, or obtain the feature from a specified customer source. For example, charging station in restaurant or hospital. For example, with a charging station in hospital, and a distinction must be made between the different groups, such as a group of users in the hospital, such as staff, patient, or visitor. Then these feature feedback and consider in generation of the IP. These sub-processes can be repeated several times to complete the system. Then the subsequent next sub-process is decision on IPR application, such as patent, trademark, or other subject of IPR are identified. Then the preparation of patent or trademark application. This part will be handled by the patent or trademark attorney. Then the last subsequent is the accompanying patent application. This sub-process can be carried out by the patent collaboration with a strategic alliance, joint venture, licensing, and so on. That is my part.
Yeah, so within every company, probably the most prominent workflow and very important workflow is the annual review of the patent portfolio. So mostly it's done on an annual basis. So usually it starts with updating the relevant information. And this is basically the critical point, because you really have to think about what kind of information you need. Then of course you need, because it's about the annuities that have to be paid, you want to know about the annuities, but also you have to check if the patent is still in line with the strategy, or if it's covering a certain product. So all this information has to be collected, because if you don't have this full set of information, of course you cannot take an informed decision on that. So that's usually done by an IP admin who collects the information and then basically forwards it to the product manager. So as one exemplary workflow, and he can give a first opinion on if a patent should be maintained or not, or if the country scope should be changed. And usually also the IP manager can be involved in that. So all these process steps, I mean, there's some leeway in changing that. But of course, the most important step is the decision as such. In this case, it's related to a steering company, because when it comes to the decision, you really need to think about who should make the decision, because certain different stakeholders in the company, they might have certain different criteria. So if you leave the decision, for example, of maintaining the patents to marketing only, it could be that when they're under cost pressure, they might just drop it because they don't look at the whole or the longer perspective of the company. So it's very important to also select the proper members of the steering committee. And once they've made a decision, which can of course be maintaining a patent or restricting it to a certain extent, or completely dropping it, then the next administrative step starts again, because the decision then as such again has to be implemented by the IP admin, which is usually a paralegal. So who's working on that? I think we lost.
Okay.
Yeah,
so
this, thanks.
Yeah, I'm taking over, Anna, I guess. So yeah, this is, I find this slide quite similar to what Bill mentioned in the third slide. So it's about the sub-processes of the generation of IP, but looking at the input, process, and output point of view. And so for this examples, we also look at the patents in terms of the process and also the trademarks. And so based on the input, so here we have, for example, like business model description. Then the process for that would be identification of IP-related business model elements. And the output of that would be related to the definition of IP requirements. For invention disclosure, then we have the process of invention disclosure and so on. And then we have the formal invention disclosure as the output of this process, of the sub-process. Description of innovation, then we have the detection of customer relevant features. So it could be something related to the parking space detection, car navigation, technology use, or different type of payment system used in the digital parking space and so on. And then these are sequential steps that actually lead up to whether the decision is to be made on the filing of the application. And if there's a filing of the application, then it leads to preparation of the actual application and submission of the application and so on. And for the trademarks, we look at the product design and marketing materials as the input that would lead to identification. The process is the identification of core elements of the communication. So that could be something related to the garage interior design, maybe parking bay design, app design, and so on. And then from that, we get the IP requirements. These are also communication elements that we look at the way on how to protect these type of designs in the product, in the design of the garage, the parking areas, and so on. And once we can identify those design elements, then we can make decision whether to file application as trademark application or or not. And if we decide to file trademark application, then we do the preparation of the application and the submission of the document and so on. So these are the sub-processes based on input, process, and output. Yeah, I guess that's my part, and maybe go to the next.
Thank you. So then now that we've seen the IP management processes, now the next question is to assign the related functions to typical functions in a company. So if you look at this slide on the left-hand side, you will see the process functions. You have a process manager, a process owner, a process leader, and a process user. And each will have a distinctive role when it comes to process management. And in the middle column, the corporate functions, these would be existing functions, ideally in the company, which would be able to fulfill these process functions. So just to take it from the top down, the process manager, that's the person who's responsible for process definition, process landscape, and process documentation. And that might be, for example, the chief technology officer. The process owner is more responsible for organization and controlling. And that could be a head of an IP department. Then further down, we have an IP manager, which can take the role of a process leader. and these are already quite hands-on functions. Here we have to implement the process and make sure that there is adherence to the processes. And then finally, we have the process users, as already explained before. This would be the people who use the system, for example, IP administrators, service providers, but also, again, the IP manager is making use of the system. And that's it for this slide.
To move on the strategy development, how basically we would like to play the game. And here starts a very important part, the continuous prior art search. And we stress the continuous prior art search because it's something that has to be done in an early stage, but also continues up to the release of the products and eventually even after the product is launched on the market. And then we move on product design for technical features, the generation of technical IP rights, and also for non-technical feature, identification of a relevant design or design feature for customer, and so generation of non-technical IP rights, including also trademarks and stuff like that. Here we have a purely technical phase, which is the testing validation prototype, a pre-series development, and then finally the production market launch. Again, FTO, but as mentioned with the FTO analysis, full before launches, but again started from the continuous prior art search that started in the early phase. And as I mentioned, sometimes for products, it's also nice to set up alerts to see just patent application that may pop up just after the product launch to strike it down before, better sooner than later. That's it for my part.